I'm Jean Littlejohn, and been a textile artist for about 45 years. And apart from my own textile practice, with my lovely friend and colleague Jan Beaney, we have been a business, Double Trouble, for many years, where we've written books and done videos and so on. For this exhibition, both of us are doing our work, our own personal practice, which is probably what gives us the most joy. Teaching has always been good, but doing our own work. And during COVID, when other people had lost their mojos, we were able to stitch because we were in a fortunate position. Our families were okay, and having that opportunity meant that we got a body of work done, and we decided we would accept the invitation to come to this show, and it would bring an end to a very interesting and inspirational period. My work for the last few years has been revolved around moons, and the reason this is so is because what's happening around us is chaos, politics, world history, but the moon comes up and we are really insignificant little specks, and every day the cycles of the world, the solar system, are there. And I just really am interested in the history, how people viewed it in the past, how it affects our lives, it affects the tides, it affects our mood, and it affects physical things. So in some of the work that I've got, for instance, I've got one called Sturgeon Moon, because there is a moon at what time of year when the sturgeons rise to the surface on the full moon, and fishermen know they can catch them. So in nature, things happen. There is a worm moon, and on the full moon, worms come to the surface. You know, it's just interesting how it impacts our lives apart from the tides. So the techniques I've used over the years, many people think I do the embellisher all the time, but for this practice it was doing hand stitch and applique. So my moons are mostly silk viscose velvet, often recycled clothes, and it's dark, and I have used discharge paste by actually applying the paste to the dark velvets and allowing the colours to be removed when you iron over them, and it takes the colour out. And these form the basis of the actual moons, which I bonded onto the surface of a cotton fabric. And then on top of that, I have hand stitched layer upon layer upon layer. And it's being inspired by the full moons. I mean, I've got one piece called the Thunder Moon, and this piece is there was a thunder moon, it was described as that in the newspapers, and I looked out at night and I saw the clouds, and it was a question of taking photographs but drawing. None of these is an exact copy of something I saw. It's an amalgamation of things that I've learned, clouds that I've drawn, and the moon. And so that particular moon has got layer upon layer upon layer of fine stitches. It seemed to me the only way I could get the effect was by using fine straight stitches. Similarly, there's a blood moon, once again, that blood moon, trying to extract the colour from all of that. So these were the larger moons, and those took over 2.5 months. But then a lot longer to think about. People are always asking how long they took. It took a while, but it took me 3 years to actually think of the various things and do the research, so longer than that. And then I have some other smaller moons which are based on, I've got a dragon moon with I've got a wolf moon, and I've got a flower moon. So there are a whole range of the different moons, and I think I have probably come to the end of this particular theme, but I have loved it. I have loved being involved in the stitching, and I've loved actually, once I've got the background done, this particular one is the emphasis is on the hand stitching, because I really wanted that rhythm and that simplicity in order at this time, which was, quite challenging to lots of people. That was almost like my little meditation every day when I was at home, and they gave me enormous pleasure to do. I never make pieces of work for sale, but then you have an exhibition, and then if people want to, they can choose to buy them. That's their choice, but they were never made for that. They were made because I wanted to push my own ideas. And I expect Jan, also we know each other very well, so in lockdown we were a bubble. Our families stayed well away, keeping the grandchildren off to keep us safe, but we formed a bubble and we stuck to the rules. We just went to each other's houses for dinner, and we could just support each other and say, we don't actually sit and work together, and we don't always say, what do you think of this one? But occasionally, Jan will say, what do you think of this, and do you think this, and do you look at mine, and I'll go, I'm not sure about, what do you think? And she'll give, we're never cruel or we're never dominating, but we certainly will support each other. And in fact, the only problem is, if you say things like, I know now, which is probably my favourite, I'm not going to say which that is. And Jan asked me which were my favourite, and I did say, and then you have to be careful then, because like your favourite children, well, don't you like the others? Of course I like the others, but I've got one or two here that I'm more fond of, because there was something about them. That's not that I don't like the others, but that's the way it goes. You can't love everything you do to the same extent, and sometimes you look at things and the ones that didn't work aren't in the show.
Hello, I'm Jean Beaney, and I've been a textile artist for even longer than Jean. And I started off as a painter, and I found I hated anything to do with stitching, embroidery. Absolutely the worst possible thing I wanted to do. But then when I hit my final final year at art college, I was introduced to somebody called Ariane Short, and we had to do disciplines that we weren't qualified in for our London University teaching qualification for art. And I suddenly found this world of the sort of embroidery that I associated with anything to do with threads and stitching. It wasn't like that. It was magical, even though looking back at it now it was very stylized. But I suddenly realized that you could really do things on a surface of fabric that was more exciting than painting. And I still paint because I like painting, I like drawing, but I found that doing glazes and palette knife work didn't quite work for me like stitch and fabric on a surface and the layers. And so really I just started off, and quite soon I suddenly had a job where I was teaching art all the time, but I had these girls that had to do O-level embroidery. It doesn't happen now. And so literally I was one page ahead of Barbara Snook and one page of the history of British embroidery, and also what's the other one, Mary Thomas. And so I decided I'd better go and find out it. So Ariane Short said to me, well, come back for an evening class and do City and Guilds and do all the embroidery. So I still carried on teaching art and so on. So I did City and Guilds and really got hooked. So I was able to teach it, and so I wasn't, I got more confident, and loved it. And soon I became a member of the 62 group, and that kept me going during teaching, because often when you're teaching that becomes your priority, because you've obviously got to get through the term. But it was wonderful to be able to have an exhibitions to work for, and I got really involved, and I've never really looked back. I've been very lucky to be part of that group, and both Jean and I have been honoured by the Designer Craftsman Society with membership, and what are we, fellows, a bit posh. And so this particular exhibition though was inspired by a place called Lefkada, it's a wetlands of Lefkada, which I didn't know was quite famous. And normally we go to this Greek place for sun and swimming, but I always draw on holiday because that's part of my holiday. Jean draws as well, but she swims a lot. My husband was a reptile in a former life, so he just likes being in the sun, and I like drawing some of the time, just as a hobby, I suppose. And then my husband had been for a walk, and he said, I think you should come along and see this place that I've just found, and it was the wetlands. So luckily, for 5 or 6 years, I was doing sketching of the wetlands, not knowing it was going to develop into a body of work. But then, of course, when I just started thinking about it the year before lockdown, and I did a couple of pieces of work here that started off, and then with lockdown, because I couldn't go anywhere, I really had to go back and look at drawings, and so I compile. I never take a sketch and just do it. I take various things. Do I want to emphasize the growth or the rhythms? Do I want to introduce the colour? The colour is what really excites me, and it's changed so much every year, even though we go the same time in September. Sometimes it's what I call mucky, dirty pink. and purples and maroons, and other times it's turquoise and greens. This year, for instance, it was nearly all ginger and sort of oranges and green. Not a bit of pink to be seen. But we were there when we had the storms, and the days after the storm I went along to have a look at it in comfortable cloudy weather, actually, because it wasn't so hot. And the flowers that I saw the very first time had suddenly just taken over. So it was very exciting. So it became a body of work. And then when we were given the chance to exhibit here, we thought, well, that's the thing to do. And so I asked my husband, not last year, the year before, would he come with me when it was nearly dark? So I could see what happens with the sun going down, the reflections, which I'd not done before. I'd obviously always gone in daytime. And so the bigger pieces here, which are more sort of landscapey and not details, I tried to capture what happens to, the afterlight of the sun's just going down, what it does to the colours. And I found that intriguing and quite difficult to do. I do various techniques. Sometimes I've stitched directly onto a fabric which I've perhaps removed the colour with discharge. So I've got a dyed background of which I then hand stitch into. Some I start off with a background like that, but then I do a layer of almost a machine lace of the landscape, very delicate, which I then wash out, stretch and apply like it's applique. And then the biggest problem is to make, because I wanted layers, because it's not too tight. It's got rhythms, and it's got a sort of a wonderful layout, this place, but it's also unruly. It's overgrown, and I don't want it to be too neat. And so I found by putting the layers on, I was able to get that slightly untidy bit without losing the rhythm that I wanted. And so sometimes it's like that, and then there are a few pieces here which are totally machine embroidery on soluble fabric, so that the fabric is a piece of fabric of which I've machined into several layers and then hand stitched. And so colour and rhythm and texture obviously is what excited me, capturing the joy of this place, and also a celebration, because if the water level goes up just a little bit, it will disappear. And so that's the sad bit. So one piece of work was called A Place of Joy, A Place of Sadness, and that's what I was referring to. And so it's now on to another subject, and I'm very excited about it. Been thinking on and off now for couple of years, quite different, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. Well, thank you very much for coming and looking at the work. I hope you found it quite interesting and enjoyable, and I don't know what else to say, really.
I think the other thing is that during lockdown, I know we've got over that now, but a lot of people are still quite unhappy about going out. We saw lots of images on screens, but I think people are surprised, even though we hope there are good photographs in our books, they really have got to the point where they want to see things in the flesh. What we do is textural, and you really want to we don't want people to sink their fingers in, but that's the feeling you get with a good quality of surface and interest, and that's what making a live exhibition so exciting, when people actually see the things that they've seen in print and see them in real life.
It's one of the nicest things this morning. Somebody said they follow us on Instagram, and they thought the colour was nice there, but they couldn't get over the quality of surface when they actually came, which was a lovely compliment to pay us.
And also, doing an exhibition like this, we've had students we've had since the time of the dinosaurs, but they've all come and just to say hello, and there's a wonderful camaraderie around the field of people with stitched textiles, a wonderful network of people we've known for many years. One of the problems is, we can't always remember their names from 40 years ago, but apart from that...
But wasn't it lovely that several of them have said, coming here has got them going again?
Yes.
That's
That's
really
what we want.
Yeah.